I'm Elliot, and here I talk about music and pop culture and stuff like that. Today, I want to talk about representation because I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been thinking a lot about how much we rely on and hope, hold out hope for institutions that feign responsibility and feign social justice change through representation, and how much we're supposed to care about representation in media and in award shows. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. And then I saw a thread on Twitter. And I think I should respond to it. The thread is by Angelica Jade, who is a writer and critic at Vulture, who I have no interest in any type of like take apart or, severe criticism. I'm actually just here to open up a discussion based off of her tweets, and hope that you all can respect that this is meant to be a respectful conversation. Nothing more, nothing less. I also want to note that this analysis has mostly been based off of sort of a basic look at ethnicity and culture, and there's a lot more obviously to representation than that. There's a lot to be said also about representation of neurodivergent people, representation of people of different gender and sexuality backgrounds, scientific. And all of these things can have tangible impacts, especially when we talk about neurodivergent people, because have you seen what people think of neurodivergent people based off of representations you see in media? Boy, oh boy. The opening tweet of Angelica's thread is something, the empty representation at the Oscars y'all are hungry for, as if it will change the anti-blackness and rot at the heart of the Hollywood project. So, of course, this is a conversation tailored towards a conversation about anti-blackness, and thus not really my space to talk about because I'm not black, and black issues like these, which are very sensitive, must prioritize the voices of black people. There are a few tweets in the thread that I do want to speak on, though, because they can extend out to people of other backgrounds. But it is worth noting that this originates as a conversation about anti-blackness, and so I want to emphasize that. So I'm just going to read a couple of the tweets in question that I want to respond to. The third tweet of the thread says, "The obsession with representation as if it does anything meaningful for regular folks, when in reality it's an illusion lining the pocket of elite artists. You know what? I'm tired." So that's what Angelica says about representation. Another tweet says, "Can't we collectively be more imaginative and expansive in how we assign works of pop culture worth? Can't we divest from the systems that manipulate and don't give a F about us?" And then there's another tweet that says, "The success of celebrities that look like you is not meaningful to your own life. Divest from the celebrity obsession." So that's 3 of the tweets in the thread. I encourage you to read the entire thread, which I have linked in the description. It's a very interesting take, very interesting points that are being made, which I completely understand. However, I do kind of feel like I should rebuttal a little bit, because I do actually feel like representation is kind of important, and maybe I'm a little dweeb for that. Maybe I am a sucker or somebody who's not serious about change and systems, but I do actually find that when I think about it from my perspective, representation in many instances can have tangible positive effects on people. And so if I'm being naive, feel free to call me out if any of my points don't make sense, or if you have any great counters, please respond. I open this up to anybody. My general thesis is representation can be important depending on how uniquely groundbreaking the representation actually is. And that's dependent on the type of representation that's offered, which I think splits into 2 primary factors. The first is who's being represented. What background are they from? What culture, what location, what ethnicity, etc., etc. And the second is how they're represented. What kind of personalities, characters, stories are being told? What's being depicted actually with these people and locations and cultures? I think that the problem with representation is not that representation in and of itself is futile in major media. I just think that it's greatly overemphasized, because it is absolutely true, as Angelica is saying, that representation is obsessed with, and it is used as almost a primary goal in achieving change with identity politics. where that's not really what representation is capable of. It can have positive effects, but those positive effects don't actually change the institutions. So if somebody wins a Grammy that is of a background that does not usually win the Grammy, that can have positive effects, is what I'm saying. But I agree that at the end of the day, as I said in my last video, thank you for supporting, the Grammys still suck. And they're still institutionally racist. And we still have to not only change it, but change it severely or get rid of it entirely. That's the hope, that's the goal. So we can't lose sight of the focus. We can't lose sight of the goal of actually changing and dismantling institutions, whatever that means to you. And representation might be nice. It might be something to fight for even on the way there, but we can't let go of that goal. Now, at this point, I do want to talk about why I think representation is actually helpful and is actually important. And I have 4 main points about this. And again, remember that there's 2 main factors: who is being represented and how. Now, if you have, for example, somebody like who is Korean winning the Oscar for Best Picture. If you have, for example, Parasite winning the Best Picture Oscar and a number of other Oscars, that's representation for Korean people. It's interesting representation. It can be cited as perhaps a great example of good representation in art and in media. And that representation can then be beneficial in 4 main ways. The first is actually material. And I want to talk about material stuff first, because when we talk about, changes in regular folks' lives, is what we say. When we talk about actual change, we tend to talk about material. And maybe we overemphasize material change too much sometimes and not other factors. But at the end of the day, material is what makes politics. It's what makes our world, our economy, everything. It's the idea of money and resources and the political power, or the power in general, over that money and those resources. If you have great representation in media, for example, Parasite gaining a lot of attention, that opens up doors for people to get jobs, particularly in media and in entertainment. For example, I'm an Asian person. When the Parasite Oscar campaign was happening, when they won the Oscar, it opened up opportunities for me and for other writers to get gigs. Okay, so very simple, straightforward, because there's representation of our people in the media. Our people, I'm not actually Korean, I'm Chinese, but you see, you take what you can get. But because there's representation of Asian people in media that is notable, noteworthy, everybody's talking about it, it's good representation, it opens a door for a film critic of Asian descent, or just a person of Asian descent in general who has interesting things to say as a writer, to write an opinion piece, to report something and get a gig. Get multiple gigs. The rise of K-pop is another thing that potentially can have positive impacts on a lot of Asian writers, Korean writers. Korean writers have gotten gigs. Korean writers like TK Park and Kim Yongdae and Jae Ha-kim and Kang Hae-ryun have gotten opportunities to write for major publications, sometimes even salaried gigs, for covering Korean pop and Hallyu and that rise. This can be said of a lot of different groups, particularly groups that are not traditionally represented. But it's not just journalists, it's not just writers, it's not just content creators like myself being able to make videos about things when they happen and get attention for them. It's also artists and media workers who, seeing the rise and success and the glory attached to the representations, can actually get gigs of their own. Because, for example, other Korean film directors might have chances taken on them by major Hollywood studios, Korean actors, etc., etc. We can even say perhaps Minari's success in 2021 has something to do with the success of Parasite before. That's up for debate. But whenever you have a situation where a particular artist, a particular representation becomes quite popular in media and people want it, that just is a signal to capitalists, hey, we'll invest more money in it. And that means that people from those backgrounds can get more opportunities to branch out, to do music, to do film, to do whatever it is, because that original thing had that glory and success attached to it. That can be said of media workers. It can be said of basically anybody that works in the entertainment industry and visible industries. So that's a material benefit. And, those material benefits can obviously trickle in some ways, for lack of a better term. There's probably other significant material effects as well, or maybe not, but that's just what's off the top of my head. Number two is the inspirational factor. Now, this is something that's a bit intangible and sounds corny, but it is true that inspiration is important. Okay, it's important to our spirit and to our emotion. Um, Presence of strong representation can have ripple effects of inspiration for creatives, enabling them to not only see themselves and find out things about themselves and find their place in art. It also can motivate people to say, hey, I could find success in that industry, in that artistic industry, in that creative industry, in that entertainment industry, in that media industry, even if it's not the pinnacle of the profession. For example, seeing Natalia Lafourcade win a Grammy or get amazing gigs, visibility, can be an inspiration to other Mexican artists to say, wow, I would love to actually do something like that. You know, I grew up looking at these other artists and I didn't really feel seen until I saw this artist, and that makes me want to explore their forms. Makes me want to explore what Natalia Lafourcade is doing musically. Maybe I can do my own version of that. Or, you know, just in general, as a Mexican artist, maybe I can find success too. And that kind of hope and that kind of identifying, you know, of cultural values and different artistic forms of expression can be very powerful. It can help benefit a lot of people who are artists and entertainers. Now, so far, I'm only talking about artists and entertainers, and I realize that. Now, that's my realm, and that's what I have the most experience understanding and talking about as a writer and a YouTuber and a musician. But there's also, you know, potentially a lot less for people who are regular, which we'll talk about. But there are still benefits for people who are not artists, for people who are not entertainers. And regardless, benefiting entertainers and artists and media people is still a good thing, and is still a material impact that can affect more than just those people directly. It can have an impact on their families, etc., etc. But it's not just there. There's also political benefits. That's my third. Political benefits from the use of effective representation. The use of representation to depict important political issues and causes in need of attention can have dramatic impact on those actual issues and the people being victimized by those situations. This is something we talk about a lot in documentarian work. It's something that we see often in terms of films that tackle heavy political subjects. A potential example of this is Roma, the 2018 Alfonso Cuarón film that was very successful and very critically acclaimed. It starred Yalitza Aparicio. So of course there was talk about the representation of a Mexican woman who is not, fair-skinned, who has darker skin, who has indigenous features, being set in the lead role of a film that is so important and killing it, of course. But it also brought a lot of attention to racial inequality and income disparity and the treatment of housekeepers in Mexico and in Latin America in general. These things can also have significant impacts on tourism industries. You see some country being depicted really cool in a film, you want to visit, etc., etc. They can have significant political impact on our world, and that means significant impact on people. And the fourth is an emotional factor. Representation can have a potent emotional impact on individuals and groups of people. There is a lot to be said about seeing yourself represented in film, seeing your culture, your family represented in film, seeing ideas explored in film that you've been struggling with your whole life that truly don't get explored very often, that can have really moving impacts on people. You don't have to just measure it by a person's productivity or what a person is making. You can also just measure it by the fact that they cry and feel incredibly seen, or the fact that they share incredibly emotional moments with their family. These things are not traditionally direct impacts, and perhaps we can say it's silly, but I don't think it's silly. Art is supposed to move us. Art is supposed to help us. Whatever way it does. And people being profoundly impacted in an emotional sense because of art is not something to just scoff at or downplay, because that's the point, right? Is that. Again, that's just my perspective, and I'm interested to hear what other people think. But in closing, there's two things in particular that I want to talk about that are kind of complicated and layered, but I hope to just blow through them shortly because I don't want to take up too much time. Things vary. The thing about racism and institutional oppression and all these things is that they vary for people of different backgrounds, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It depends on what background the person's from, how they might view representation. For a black person, seeing representation in a film or in the recording academy maybe doesn't move you at all, because you know that it doesn't benefit you at this point to see just people that look like you. You want to see people that look like you around you being given the resources, the materials, the actual change that they need. And you recognize that at this point, more representation may not do anything. That may be how you feel. But for somebody who's from a background that's historically not represented in American media, they may feel entirely different about themselves being represented on screen. And of course, there's a lot of different subdivisions, because you can represent black people a lot, but perhaps you only represent a certain type of black people and a certain type of black story. But again, also, you might not have ever seen a Southeast Asian person on screen until you saw Crazy Rich Asians, until you saw, the new Disney film that has a lot of controversy attached to it. For this reason, representation might be a lot more beneficial for you. Because, for example, if you're a writer of a certain background and nobody is ever representing you in media, it gives you nothing really to get the edge on in terms of writing about anything in media. And God knows that people from marginalized backgrounds don't necessarily get the first scoop on general stories. So getting that opportunity to get big gigs based off of your people being represented can be materially beneficial. Of course, it's not enough, but it can be helpful. And that's all that I'm saying. But lastly, I kind of want to talk about how regular people are factored into this. So Angelica Jade at one point, as I mentioned earlier, tweets that representation does not do anything meaningful for regular folks. That's the phrase that she uses. And I just have a little bit of a problem with that kind of phrasing or that kind of dialectic, because it's not very useful to pit people as being regular and irregular, where we're not talking about significant changes in material. And yes, the primary people being benefited are rich folks, rich artists. However, regular people, they may make a lot of terrible decisions. They may be very stupid, but so do we, irregular people, Everybody does. And regular people are also very capable of understanding certain things that may help them. They're capable of understanding that certain things may benefit them in some way, materially or otherwise. And so it's not our place to look at people that are not in our industry or that are not of our backgrounds in particular, that don't have our brains, etc., to say that those people are regular people and we're not. It's a bad dichotomy, and it's important also to be, when setting up that dichotomy, to avoid, let's say, speaking about regular folks as if we know what's best for them. Because we kind of do, and then we kind of don't, right? Overall, if we're speaking about regular folks as if there's somebody separate from ourselves, then they probably have a better idea of what they want and what's beneficial for them than we do. And if they think representation in media is helpful for them because it helps them emotionally, it got them a gig, who are we to say, yeah, but it didn't really help you, did it? We often use this phraseology and this dichotomy of, the regular folks need this and this and that. And it's important to remember that working class people, of course, have different lifestyles. And no, their lives are not fundamentally changed by somebody getting an award. But we should also be careful with that. For one, as I've outlined so far in this video, we can't really say that definitively across all people. And number two, we should try to avoid potentially giving ourselves a savior complex, which I'm not saying Angelica has here, but we should avoid giving ourselves some type of savior complex to say that this is what the people need. And they just don't know what they think that this is good for them, but they're just fooled. They're all fools. And I, intelligent critic, will now tell them actually it's all a lie. And this is what you need. Not only does that come off as condescending to a lot of people, but it also doesn't really work as a good way to organize, and it doesn't really work as a general material analysis, because we can't, again, truly say what benefits people and what doesn't. What benefits me is perhaps not breaking my phone by dropping it on the floor. So again, I don't want to bring any negative attention towards Angelica and her work. But that's just my input on her thread, and I hope that you guys got something from this video. And if you have rebuttals to me, please share them. If you like this video, like and subscribe. Smash that like button, dude. Hit the comment section, type something up, subscribe, and also we have donation links in the Patreon. YouTube is screwing me out of the partner program. I hate YouTube so much, so your donations mean the world. And if you're a supporter, that would be a great way to support. But overall, it's totally chill if you just want to watch. Hope that this was cool, and let's continue a conversation about this that's beneficial for all people. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Peace. That was not cute. Peace. Goodbye.